A surprising twist occurred on the sixth day of the nationally watched federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Oscar-winning actress Monique, who was not on the initial witness list, unexpectedly appeared in court and testified under oath. With detailed notes and testimony that had been kept under wraps for years, her appearance caught both the prosecution and defense by surprise. Monique mentioned Hollywood powerhouses like Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey, and Sean Combs himself, something no one saw coming. Her calm and measured approach could have been the turning point in the entire trial. Those in the courtroom could not help but sense the tension in the air as Monique entered the courtroom. Diddy, in a charcoal suit, was seen leaning toward his attorney, whispering in annoyance. Immediately, reporters were in motion, sending out their first reports. The prosecution began shuffling papers with palpable urgency. Within minutes, Monique began to lay out a complex story of the silent pressures of the entertainment industry, a system built on retaliation, backroom deals, and intentional silence. "I'm here to tell the truth," she declared, "and that's exactly what I'm going to do." What followed was not a simple account, but a layer-by-layer dismantling of the wall of silence that surrounds the industry's most influential figures. She opened by recounting a 2018 phone call with filmmaker Tyler Perry. According to Monique, Perry acknowledged that her dismissal from the industry was unfair. He reportedly promised to apologize, but that promise has yet to materialize. When asked why, Monique said that Perry said it wasn't just about her, but about everyone else who might be affected if the story came to light. "He told me, and I quote, 'If I go public, it's going to get Puff in trouble,'" she recalled, using Diddy's famous nickname. Gasps could be heard in the courtroom. Jurors were said to have leaned forward. The revelations that followed only added to the tension. Monique went on to describe an invitation to a private 2006 event in the Hollywood Hills, hosted by Diddy. She described candlelit rooms, confiscation of phones, and a low-key atmosphere that was far from the image of a normal social event. She recalled the moment when someone mentioned a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, and she was asked to sign one, but she refused and left. As a result, she said, she was removed from the professional circle. "I was removed," she told the court. "The phone stopped ringing. I was labeled as difficult to work with, but I will never forget what I saw." The prosecution quickly questioned whether her experience matched what other witnesses described. Monique nodded and said it was a system, a structure set up to test loyalty and punish dissent. And then came what many in attendance would later call the turning point of the trial. She brought up an event that went viral on social media, when Tyler Perry publicly donated $1 million to Bishop T.D. Jakes' church. At the time, the act was lauded as generous, but Monique said it was strategic. "It wasn't a donation, it was a quid pro quo," she said. She said the timing coincided with the disappearance of many unfavorable articles and rumors, many of them involving Diddy. The prosecution then presented a photo taken a few weeks after the church incident, showing Perry and Diddy at an award show together, arms around each other in a friendly manner. The photo was seen as a clear, not coincidental sign of connection. From her purse, Monique pulled out a handwritten note, a record of a private conversation with Perry. She handed it to the court officer. The judge reviewed the first few lines and nodded for the court to continue. The courtroom fell silent as she began to read. "She's not difficult. She just doesn't want to work for nothing," Perry allegedly said. But then he admitted, "I can't go public. There's too much of a cover-up around Puff." The reaction in the courtroom was immediate. Monique's voice was steady and clear. "You think this trial is just about Diddy?" she asked, turning to the jury. "It's about everyone who chose to stand with him and chose to stay silent instead of speaking up." As the judge accepted the transcript into evidence, Diddy's lawyers reportedly exchanged tense whispers behind the file. The prosecution, which initially focused on a single individual, quickly gained momentum and expanded into a broader investigation, into what Monique calls the silence machine, a quiet but powerful culture of complicity, maintained by privacy agreements and NDAs. What began as a lawsuit against one man morphed, in a matter of hours, into a sweeping indictment of the entire system that had enabled him to survive and thrive. And at the center of that wave was Monique. No longer the actress who had been shunned from the spotlight, she was now a sworn witness with concrete revelations that directly challenged the power structures of the entertainment industry. This was no longer a simple comeback by an artist, but a public confrontation with the system that had tried to silence her. Her return became a declaration of war with compelling evidence, detail, and precision. When she returned to the stand after a brief break, it wasn't just Sean Diddy Combs who was under scrutiny. It was the entire system that surrounded him. The media handlers, the high-ranking associates, the organizations that had served as his shield. Monique brought names, dates, and hard evidence. There was no room for ambiguity. "There's a list in Hollywood," she began. "Even if it doesn't exist on paper, everyone knows it exists. The list of people who are not allowed to touch you." The room held its breath. Puff was on it, Tyler was on it, and Oprah, she was kind of the one who created it. With that, what had seemed like a personal disagreement was elevated to a systemic indictment. Monique's testimony gradually became a case study in how silence is engineered and maintained, how reputations are protected, dissenters are isolated, and power is used as a tool for cover-up. She points to an email she received by accident, a redacted correspondence from a communications executive who represented both Diddy and Tyler Perry. The subject line, Monique Story Management. Her name, Diddy's name, Tyler's name, all in the same thread. "They all used the same person to clean up the mess," she says, "and I know that because I saw that email thread. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did." The judge, after reviewing it, agreed to allow the redacted version into evidence. For the first time in the trial, a digital link came to light, directly connecting many of the influential figures in the case. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but Monique wasn't done yet. In a brief but haunting section of her testimony, she read a statement from an unnamed actor, redacted for security, who said he had attended a private meeting hosted by a powerful male director. Phones were confiscated, documents were signed, and what happened inside, the witness said, wasn't art, it was submission. Monique declined to identify the organizer. She didn't have to. Some in the room got the message. They recognized what she was implying. The prosecution had made its strategy clear. This case wasn't just about Diddy. It was about how a network of cultural influencers had built a defense mechanism for such behavior by trading favors, controlling the media, and enforcing the illusion of innocence. The trial turned to allegations that Monique was ostracized after the huge success of Precious, an Oscar-winning film that should have been a turning point in her career. Instead, it was the beginning of a silence that lasted more than a decade. She recalled a call from a low-level executive at Diddy's media company, Revolt TV. The message was short but powerful. "You offended the wrong person. Puff doesn't like noise." The phrase "don't like noise" later reappeared when the prosecution presented a series of internal emails from a media company that jointly represents Tyler Perry Studios and Revolt. The emails mentioned Monique and Cassie Ventura in the same exchange. The phrase narrative management appeared repeatedly. It was the first time the court had concrete evidence of a planned media campaign on multiple fronts. As the documents were presented, Monique's eyes never left the jury. "They use the word difficult to work with like a virus," she said. "Once it gets attached to you, it spreads. Directors, producers, studios, they hear your name, and they have a reason to turn away." Then she said a line that silenced the courtroom and quickly went viral. "I wasn't ostracized because of my skin color. I was ostracized by black people who looked like me, people who were more afraid of losing their place than they were of losing their truth." No one objected. No one said anything. And it was in that silence that the courtroom, and perhaps the entire entertainment culture, came to terms with the weight of her testimony. Monique went on to describe the 13 years she spent in the media shadows, the phone calls that became less frequent and then disappeared, The labels of ungratefulness from producers. Advice like, be grateful for what you have. And warnings, sometimes vague, sometimes explicit, be quiet. I don't want to be here, she said. But I have to be here. Because what they're doing to me, and to Cassie, and to the young women and men out there, it's not going to stop until someone speaks louder than the machine that's silencing them. The prosecution let her continue. And for the next 15 minutes, Monique shared what she called her breaking point. Not a single moment, but a series of them. The recording of Diddy's heated reaction. Cassie Ventura's shaky testimony. I saw it all, she said, and I heard my grandmother's voice in my head, honey, don't let them write your story when you're not in the room. That's when she decided to speak up. She ended the day with a final series of revelations. That Tyler Perry, she said, had called to stop people from working with her. That he could have supported her, but chose to support someone else. She held up a thick file. I have the call logs, she said. I know who was at the parties. I know who signed the non-disclosure agreements. I saw them sign them right in front of me. The defense protested immediately, but the impact of that moment was irreversible. The jury heard it. The courtroom felt it. Monique's transformation was undeniable, from silent pariah to central witness, from shunned actress to exposer of a system. This was no longer just a man's case. This was about a power machine that ran on silence, and about the first person brave enough to turn it off. When the court reopened on Saturday, the mood had changed. The courtroom was packed early. Reporters had been on duty since dawn. Outside the courthouse, protesters held up signs that went viral on social media. I am not being ostracized. I am being rejected by people who look like me. By 9:01 a.m., it was clear that Monique wasn't finished. Not just finished. She had just begun. She returned to the stand, this time without papers, without notes. I don't need a file, she said. I have names, and I have a list. Then she repeated what she had said the day before, but this time slowly, firmly. There is a list in Hollywood. She scanned the room, the gaze of someone who had been backed into a corner but still stood firm. That list doesn't need to be written down, but it's real, and everyone in the business knows it. She paused. The courtroom grew quiet, as if awaiting a storm. If you talk too much, if you ask the wrong questions, if you don't follow the script, you're gone, not arrested, not fired, just gone. And no one asks why. The jury sat motionless. Diddy was silent. So was the judge. Puff was on that list, she said, and Tyler, and Oprah. She was kind of the founder. This wasn't just a figure of speech. This was a power map, and Monique was starting to redraw it. She listed the names, actors, directors, producers. Some were familiar, some were forgotten. People who, she said, had been on the brink of great careers and then suddenly disappeared. Have you ever wondered why people have hit shows and then go silent? It's not always because they're failing. Sometimes it's because they know too much. The prosecution followed up with a sealed statement from a former actress, redacted for security. In it, the person describes a closed-door meeting with a powerful filmmaker, phones seized, a non-disclosure agreement signed, and an atmosphere of ritualism, with cameras, rules, and consequences. No names are mentioned, and Monique doesn't name any. She doesn't need to. You don't need to know, she says quietly. It's not who's running it. It's how many people choose to stay silent. The prosecution then produces internal memos describing how it handles reputational threats involving Diddy and his associates. Tactics include digital content deletion, reshaping the media narrative, and coordinating information with influencers. Strategies for diverting attention are detailed. The defense objected, but the judge allowed most of it. Then it was Oprah. Monique insisted that her mention of Oprah was not a matter of resentment, but of a warning. In 2010, she said, I told her something very personal, that I had been abused by my brother. She promised not to discuss it. The courtroom seemed to freeze. As soon as I refused to do a requested interview, she put my brother on the air. Monique paused. She said it was the job. But I knew. It was a form of punishment, quietly and publicly. For the first time, her voice broke, but she didn't stop. It wasn't just a segment. It was leverage, a warning to anyone who was watching or preparing to replace me. The prosecution responded with a detailed timeline, the fallout from the show, the media campaign, and the boycott that followed. Emails from Oprah's team to PR firms that worked with Perry and Diddy were also released. The content was a uniformity of image and content control. Nothing too shocking, but enough to indicate a real network. Monique closed her testimony with a chilling but profound statement. "Careers are a currency," she said, "and silence. Sometimes you get paid to keep it. Sometimes you get paid not to keep it." She stepped off the stand. The courtroom held its breath. By lunchtime, social media was ablaze. On Twitter, a new phrase was trending at breakneck speed: the Monique Doctrine, a cultural indictment of power, control through silence, and the cost of telling the truth. What began as a celebrity trial has morphed into something else entirely, and at the center of the seismic event is a once marginalized woman who is rewriting history. By the fourth day of testimony, it was clear that Monique was no longer just a surprise witness. She had become the fulcrum upon which the entire case hinged. Her testimony didn't just expose abuses of power, it tore down the system that had protected Diddy. And for the first time, the court was forced to confront the question it had long avoided. How much truth can the industry tolerate before it collapses? As Monique continued to stand her ground, prosecutors shifted gears, from recounting personal experiences to peeling back the mechanisms that operated at their roots. The goal now was to prove that Monique's disappearance was neither an accident nor the result of artistic failure. It was a deliberate arrangement, driven by fear and control. "What do you think is behind this systematic silence?" the prosecutor asked. "Fear," Monique answered without hesitation. "The industry operates on fear. Fear of losing opportunity. Fear of losing the spotlight. Fear of being left out of the table they've worked so hard to sit at. And people like Puff, like Tyler, and yes, Oprah, have made speaking the truth a price no one is willing to pay." Monique looked at Diddy. "You thought no one would speak," she said quietly. "You built an empire of silence. Now you're the one who has to sit still. And I hope this time you're listening." According to many reporters, the room was deathly silent, as if the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for something to break out. But what came next was even more shocking. Monique revealed that after her career stalled, she got a call from a low-level executive at Diddy's own Revolt TV platform. The voice was familiar, someone who had worked with her on media events. The message was simple, but it was a warning. You messed with the wrong person. It wasn't just Tyler or Oprah. Puff didn't like the noise either. Monique paused and said, "That's when it hit me. I wasn't collateral damage. I was a threat to the order they wanted to maintain." The prosecutors didn't miss their chance. They released a string of emails from media consultants who worked with both Tyler Perry Studios and Revolt TV, outlining a coordinated media campaign to change the way the public viewed Monique and Cassie Ventura, another key witness who had accused Diddy of abuse. The connection was clear. Both had broken their silence, and both, it seemed, became targets. To the jury, this was no longer a coincidence. It was a design. Casting directors began to grow cold. Scripts stopped coming. Meetings were canceled at the last minute. One assistant director even told her agent, "We can't let her name come up. It's too much trouble." "They use the word difficult to work with as a weapon," Monique said, "and they spread it like a plague." The word spread, like a curse, a stamp on her. It came before her voice, leaving her calendar empty as doors closed. Finally, prosecutors presented evidence from internal memos that showed a campaign to remove the keyword targeting her from social media platforms, removing her name from awards nominations, season predictions, even retrospectives on the history of the entertainment industry. Her image, once lit up by stage lights, is now digitally blurred. "This is not accidental oblivion," the prosecutor told the court. "This is intentional erasure." Monique nodded slowly. "And it worked," she said. For a long time it worked. Her voice trailed off, quiet and thoughtful. She said she was told to be reasonable, to be grateful to be on set. Black women in this business don't have the luxury of living by principles, she said. Then she looked directly into the courtroom. Let me be clear, she paused, then added, I didn't lose my career. My career was taken away, and the most heartbreaking thing is, the people who did it looked like me. The courtroom held its breath. They had heard some shocking testimony during the trial, but few had gone this deep. The judge, still calm, called a 10-minute recess. Meanwhile, the courtroom erupted in an uproar. Journalists, spectators, and legal experts were all trying to make sense of what had just happened. Outside the courtroom, the mood was different. What had once been a tabloid fodder had transformed into a cultural moment, a moral test. A civil rights lawyer in the courtroom later told reporters, "This is no longer about Diddy. This is about how power uses culture as a cloak to protect itself." As the trial resumed, Monique returned with a closing statement for the day. Not dramatic, not loud, but thoughtful and thoughtful. "I didn't come here to destroy anyone," she said. "I came here because I refuse to let them continue to destroy me in silence." With that, she concluded her testimony for the day. The prosecution decided to pause to restructure its approach, to reshape its witness list based on the ripples Monique had just unleashed. The defense was left with nothing but silence, forced to confront a witness whose credibility had been built over years and who had now become the emotional and moral anchor of the entire trial. As the trial wound down, there was no doubt that the case had grown far larger than it had been. What had once been a singular legal investigation into Sean Diddy Combs had morphed into a sweeping examination of entertainment culture. Institutions that had once seemed untouchable began to shake. Stories that had once been buried were unearthed, and the very industry that had made Monique invisible was now confronted with the silence it had systematically engineered. Then, the unthinkable happened. Without warning, the defense, which had always maintained an aggressive, defensive tone, suddenly announced that it would refuse to cross-examine Monique. No rebuttal, no questioning. The excuse was prudent legal strategy, but in the courtroom everyone knew. They feared she would say more. She wasn't just a credible witness. She had become an impregnable fortress, an unstoppable voice. The prosecution didn't miss its chance. They brought to the stand a digital forensics expert who had verified call logs submitted by Monique in Part 4 of the case. The data showed direct communications between Tyler Perry's team and executives at Revolt TV, taking place right around the time Monique had turned down a major media tour. Some of the calls even coincided with the exact time her major movie deals were abruptly canceled. And then came the key piece of evidence. A previously secret recording was reviewed under seal. In it, a voice matching Perry's vocal profile is heard saying, "I know she's not a difficult person, but if she doesn't apologize publicly, we can't move forward. Otherwise, just leave it alone. People will forget. She'll be fine." Only a transcript was allowed to be read. No audio was played, but the impact was clear. There were gasps in the courtroom. What had been a case of personal abuse had morphed into a show about how powerful people quietly manipulate the narrative, all under the guise of public image management. The final witness called by the prosecution was a former assistant to a major entertainment PR firm. They testified under whistleblower protection, and their testimony was a blow. "We were told to monitor the article, flag keywords, and put down certain people through reverse SEO. Monique was at the top of the list." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked stunned. With the final testimony recorded, the hearing moved to closing arguments the next morning. The prosecution took a hard line. "This case began with an abused individual," the lead attorney said. "But what we uncovered was far more terrifying. An ecosystem of silence, built and run by influential people who knew exactly what they were doing." They reminded the jury of Cassie Ventura's collapse on the stand. The recordings, the photos, the parties, the rituals, and now, the woman who broke that dam. Monique's career wasn't destroyed by a man's ego. It was by a machine designed to crush anyone who said no. Meanwhile, the defense stuck to a narrow strategy. They tried to portray Monique as emotionally driven by old grudges and desperate for attention again. But the trial, like the world outside its walls, had changed. The public, once skeptical and distant, now saw her in a different light. And then, just before the jury entered its deliberations, something unexpected happened. Monique was allowed to speak one last time, no longer as a witness, but as a citizen. "I'm not here for revenge," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "I'm here to restore honor to every artist who's ever been labeled as uncomfortable, to every woman who's ever been told they should be grateful, to everyone who's ever lost a career because they made a powerful person uncomfortable." Her voice was quiet but steady. Each word was carefully measured. "You don't need a camera or a stage to make history," she continued. "You just have to dare to speak the truth, especially when it's the truth people want buried the most." Then she turned to Diddy, who sat there, his face impassive, unreadable. "You built an empire," she said slowly. "But there's one thing you forgot. Every empire falls." 3 days later, the jury returned a partial verdict, opening the way for new indictments, a perjury investigation, and a series of subpoenas. But by then, the trial had become more than a legal dispute. It became a cultural milestone, a moment of inevitable confrontation. Monique, once marginalized and nearly erased from the industry, now stands at the center of a wave of change. Not just a survivor of abuse, but someone who has reclaimed the right to tell her story. And for the first time in more than a decade, she no longer has to fight to be heard. She is the voice that breaks the silence. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video until the end. If today's content touches you, please share it so that more people can hear, see, and understand. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories. When Keanu Reeves took the stand, the room held its breath. Everyone expected a quiet, calm sharing, true to his usual calm image. But what happened took the audience completely by surprise. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't shed tears, and didn't criticize anyone. In a slow and calm voice, Keanu recounted a personal experience from 2014. A private dinner with Sean Diddy Combs, where he was offered a special role with strange and unclear conditions. While the offer might initially strike some as a joke or personal eccentricity, through Keanu's telling, that strange feeling quickly turned into something much more thoughtful. The entire courtroom seemed to quiet down as they began to understand that behind the glamorous facade of the entertainment industry, there may be more complex and sophisticated layers. It started like any other Hollywood dinner. At least that's how Keanu Reeves imagined it. In late 2014, while filming in Los Angeles, he received an unusual invitation. Not from a director or a producer, but from Sean Diddy Combs himself. The message was brief, unassuming. "Private dinner. Creative people only. Come alone." The location was a secluded mansion high in the Malibu hills, away from the showbiz buzz, away from the spotlights. Reeves, cautious but curious by nature, agreed. When he arrived, things felt off-key. There were no waiters, no guests, just a guard at the gate checking his ID and taking his phone. "No video equipment," the guard said. Inside, the house didn't feel like a normal residence. Candles lined the hallway, music blaring from hidden speakers. At the center of a long dining table, Diddy stood, smiling serenely. "Keanu, glad you came." The table was set for just the two of them. There was no crew, no party, just a quiet, staged atmosphere. Diddy poured wine, raised his glass, and said, "Let's talk about legacy." As Keanu later testified, the mood quickly shifted from a creative meeting to something harder to name, a dialogue that was more ceremonial than technical. There was no script, no mention of a studio. Diddy spoke in symbolic language, telling stories about power, selection, and the doors that were only available to those willing to change. "This isn't about acting," Keanu recalled Diddy saying. This is about transformation. This is about who you are when no one is watching. At first, Keanu thought maybe this was some kind of performance art, some avant-garde filmmaking idea. But as the conversation continued, something about the delivery made him uneasy. And then he said, Diddy leaned forward and said something that made the room strangely quiet. From that moment on, Keanu knew that the night wasn't just about art. It was about a choice and a boundary. To begin with, Diddy said, you're going to have to show loyalty. No agents, no press, no cameras, just silence, candlelight, and something in the air, as if there were some unspoken rule that Keanu was not yet allowed to understand. What followed, Keanu later testified, was nothing like a movie pitch as he knew it. It wasn't like a creative meeting, he said. It was more like a brainstorming session, a ritual than a conversation. Diddy slid a black folder toward him. It wasn't an industry-standard contract. There was no movie title, no script, no director or shooting schedule. Inside was just a single sheet of printed paper with a headline in block letters in the middle of the page, Loyalty Agreement Framework. Its contents were brief, but strange, as if written in a language only those inside could truly understand. Section 1. Trust the process even if you don't understand it. Section 2. Don't mention this project to anyone. Section 3. You will enter the waters of rebirth as others have. Section 4. You must not ask questions. Section 5. The reward is legacy, not money. If you seek payment, leave immediately. Section 6. Purification is mandatory. Section 7. Loyalty is eternal. Keanu said he sat there for a while, saying nothing. There were no studio logos, no copyright information, no legal representations, just a strange document with the tone of a ritual rather than a contract. Is this a casting call? Keanu asked, still hoping it was just an unorthodox artistic approach. But Diddy just smiled, neither confirming nor denying. You ask too many questions, Keanu, he said. That's why I chose you. Doubt. It's the ultimate test of loyalty. At that moment, Keanu said, something inside him began to warn him. He no longer saw this as a career opportunity, but as something unnamed, but clearly out of the ordinary. I've worked with the strangest directors, the strangest auditions, he said, but nothing like this. When Keanu asked for more clarity about the nature of the project, about its true purpose, Diddy's voice changed. It became quieter, lower, almost a whisper. You're thinking too small. You want a script? I'm inviting you into something much bigger. Keanu paused as he recounted that moment in court. The room fell silent, as if everyone could feel the strangeness he was describing. That was the moment I knew, he said. This was no longer a role, this was a choice, and I didn't move on. On the perfectly polished walnut table, Diddy gently placed a small black stone. He looked straight at Keanu with a gaze that was both serious and strangely unfathomable. When you go into the shower, Diddy said, his voice low and suggestive, take this with you, and when you come out, you won't be the same person. That's when the real journey begins. Keanu narrowed his eyes, half joking, half doubting. What do you mean? What's Hauer? Diddy laughed, a slow laugh that was a little creepy. That's the second part of the pledge. The moment you get wet, you enter another reality, a reality that can't be reversed. Keanu said that at that moment he felt confused, even a little uneasy. But Diddy didn't stop. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. We're all connected through water. It holds energy. It holds memories. That's why who bathes with whom is more meaningful than you think. It's not just physical, it's ritual. Keanu said that at that moment, he felt everything around him go still, as if the whole room was listening to Diddy's breathing. A ritual was being invoked, a form of test of loyalty, not metaphorical, not spiritual, but a very real, concrete ritual. If you're serious, Diddy said, you're going to bring this stone to our next meeting. You're going to go into that room, into the bath I just got out of. That's how we'll know who's ready, who's brave enough to be reborn. Keanu initially thought it was some kind of weird metaphor or a joke gone too far, but Diddy didn't smile, didn't blink. He was dead serious. "My assistant will have everything ready. When you walk in, it's all over again." In the courtroom years later, Keanu recalled the incident, his eyes distant, as if he were still trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. He said he stared at Diddy for a long time, waiting for some sign that this was some kind of psychological test, some kind of weird test. But there was none. Diddy just refilled his glass and asked, "Are you in?" Keanu didn't answer. He stood, thanked him for the dinner, and left quietly. When he reached his car, a black envelope was waiting for him, neatly placed on the driver's seat. Inside was a black card, emblazoned with gold letters. "Loyalty is tested in water." Keanu never looked back. He says that even to this day, he's not sure if he was walking into some kind of bizarre experiment, some kind of secret practice, or just some elaborate psychological game. But he does know one thing. There are doors that, once opened, cannot be closed. And for Keanu, it was a door he chose not to walk through. That night, a strange wave of change began to creep quietly into Keanu Reeves's life. No noise, no warning, just a series of small movements, nameless silences that began to ripple through his career and the world around him. Keanu says that after the questionable dinner at Diddy's mansion, he tried to write it off as a Hollywood oddity, a wacky moment that would soon be forgotten. But it didn't. Instead, things began to shift. No one spoke out, no one criticized or published anything, but a subtle distance slowly began to form. 3 days after the dinner, the first sign appeared. At 3:17 a.m., the landline in his house rang. The screen showed no number, just the words, "unknown." When Keanu picked up, there was silence on the other end of the line, except for a slow, long, deliberate breath. Then the line went dead. No voice, no message, just a breath. He thought it was a joke. But then it happened again. 5 times in 2 weeks, all at odd hours, all untraceable calls, and all with the same pattern, a pause, then a breath. He began to notice unfamiliar cars parked near his house. No movement, no clear license plates, just there, as if to be seen. Then one morning, walking to the garage, Keanu found a black envelope tucked under his windshield wiper. Inside was a thin strip of paper, printed in a sharp font. "Unfinished rituals always have consequences." At the bottom was a single letter, S, no sender's name, no identification, a vague warning that echoed like an echo in his mind. In court, Keanu admitted that it made him uneasy, but tried to reassure himself that it was probably just a strange coincidence. He contacted his longtime agent, who immediately advised him, "If you don't sign anything, don't say anything, then let everything fall silent." But then he added something that Keanu could not forget. There are people who are not used to hearing no, especially when they believe you belong to them. As Keanu tried to continue working, he began to feel an invisible wall building up around him. A leading role in an indie film that was in the preparation stage was abruptly canceled just days before pre-production began. The studio suddenly had financial concerns, even though everything had been fine before. Soon after, a cameo in a major franchise sequel also disappeared without explanation. There was no casting change, no reason from the producers. The role was just removed. Keanu tried to believe it was just the times, but then a director he had worked with and respected reached out. He said simply, "I don't know what you've backed out of, but whatever it is, it scares the hell out of powerful people." That's when Keanu knew it wasn't personal. Something bigger was going on behind the scenes of Hollywood. A silent game he'd never agreed to play, but was drawn into anyway, simply because he dared to step forward. The invitations dwindled, the calls died down. Once close associates suddenly dropped out. He described one particular night, a lavish charity gala with A-listers in attendance. As he stood by the bar, a famous actress, once a trusted colleague, walked by. She paused for just a moment, tilted her head and whispered, "You said no, didn't you?" Then she smiled and walked away as if the conversation had never happened. At that moment, Keanu realized that night at Diddy's mansion was more than just an invitation to dinner. It was a test, a door, and he walked the wrong way. The subsequent testimony in court has gradually created a larger picture, and a lot more bizarre than anyone could have imagined. It's not just Keanu Reeves. Other witnesses have begun to emerge. Some are artists, some are producers, and a few were assistants or backstage workers. They tell of exotic, lavish dinners, gatherings surrounded by soft lighting and soft music, where stories were accidentally shared. And then, of careers that have suddenly taken off. Many once unknown figures have suddenly become household names after just one season. They've been cast in top projects, signed to major brand deals, and made heavy media appearances. Conversely, those who have turned down invitations, whether direct or tactful, seem to fade into obscurity, sometimes disappearing from the industry altogether. Not because of scandal, not because of professional failure, but simply being quietly sidelined. Keanu says he began to see a hidden pattern, a kind of unknown game operating beneath the industry's shiny facade. It was like a house of mirrors in front of the producers, directors, and studios. But behind the scenes, the people actually pulling the strings never showed. They didn't make choices. They shaped reality. One incident in particular stuck with Keanu. About 4 months after the evening with Diddy, his name was removed from a major charity campaign he had co-founded. He received an email from the executive informing him that the board had decided to go in a different direction. No specific reason was given. Just days later, the campaign received a large anonymous donation, and a new face was revealed, an actor with clear ties to Diddy's team. Keanu described the feeling not as being rejected, but as being deliberately excluded, and it started happening again. A meeting with a senior executive was interrupted by a phone call. When he returned, the executive simply stood up and said coldly, "We'll have to reschedule. I'll call you later." But the call never came. At trial, Keanu said, "It wasn't blacklisted, it was erased from the picture, quietly and completely, without a sound, without a trace, but very effectively." One of the most shocking moments in the testimony came when Keanu recounted exactly what Diddy had said at dinner that night. Not a direct invitation, but a symbolic statement, a mix of innuendo and threat. Midway through the meal, as the lights dimmed and the music faded to a soft background, Diddy leaned back in his chair, raised his glass, and began to speak. No names, no faces, but he was clearly referring to some of the industry's most prominent figures. "Have you ever wondered why that person rose to fame so quickly?" Diddy said, his eyes never leaving Keanu. "Loyalty. He got in the tub, no questions, no hesitation." Diddy went on to talk about an actress who had found success with a hit trilogy. "She didn't ask anything. She understood. That's why she got the billion-dollar trilogy." Keanu laughed at first. He thought it was a strange metaphor, a quirk that many in the entertainment industry use. But Diddy wasn't kidding. He continued in a flat, emotionless voice. "People who have done it understand, and they never talk. That's why they have everything, because they showed me their minds." It was then that Keanu realized this was no longer the usual talk of the industry. This was a form of selection, a spiritual ritual, or even a kind of unspoken commitment whose meaning only those on the inside could understand. There was no explosion. There was no concrete evidence. But the pieces of the puzzle Keanu presented seemed to fit together in a terrifying way, a hidden system that operated on silence, rewards, and punishments. In court, Keanu Reeves remained silent about the specific names mentioned in the story. However, he confirmed that the conversation involved some of the biggest names in global entertainment. He shared that Diddy did not directly accuse anyone, but rather subtly hinted at the implications, that some individuals had achieved extraordinary success by accepting things that most people would never agree to. Keanu admitted that at the time what he heard was hard to believe. But over the years, as he watched the people mentioned rise to dominate the entertainment industry, while other talents suddenly disappeared, he began to sense that something was wrong. "I didn't want to believe it," he said, "but every time I saw a familiar face suddenly pop up after a dinner or a private meeting, it was hard to ignore." Among them, there was one name that stuck with him. Keanu said Diddy had mentioned a new actor who had just been cast in a big superhero movie. When asked how he got the part, Diddy simply smiled and said he just had to soak in water for 2 minutes. 2 minutes. That was it. The courtroom fell silent. A few jurors shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor, sensing the weight of the testimony, paused before asking his next question. Perhaps sensing the deeper meaning behind Keanu's words, the testimony ended with a thoughtful statement. If it had been just me, I might have passed. But I know I'm not the only one who's ever been offered that role. I'm one of the few who've turned it down. Keanu then went on to recount an experience that seemed straight out of a psychological thriller. After that first night in Malibu, and a series of strange phone calls that left him struggling at work, a second invitation came from Diddy, one that made him consider his career and his personal principles. This time, there were no lavish evenings or elaborate rituals, just a message forwarded by a mutual acquaintance. If you want to understand the system, come see the archives. Keanu didn't respond at first, but curiosity began to fester. Part of him wondered, could this be some kind of weird performance art or just another prank in an industry that was used to pushing boundaries? Eventually, Keanu agreed to meet, but requested that the location be neutral. Instead of a typical coffee shop or office, however, he was taken to a Beverly Hills penthouse. But the interior didn't feel like a place to live. It felt like a surveillance center, windowless, minimally furnished, walls lined with monitors and the hum of machinery as if the air in the room were listening. It was here, Keanu says, that Diddy showed him what he called insurance. He pointed to a set of metal drawers, each locked and labeled with a person's name. He didn't open any of them. He didn't need to. What he said next sent a chill down Keanu's spine. Everyone has a weakness. I just make sure my files are organized. Then he turned to him and said softly, if you'd come in, you'd have your own drawer. But right now you're a man of your own choosing. Keanu said that in that moment it was clear to him. These were no ordinary documents. These were secrets, evidence, binding clauses, possibly confidentiality agreements, and the names on them, people the public admired, trusted, and sometimes revered. Then he was given one last chance. You don't have to say anything, Diddy allegedly said. Just show up. We'll record the silence. That's enough. Keanu said no, gently but firmly. He stood up to leave, and before the elevator doors closed, he remembered his final words. Silence is loyalty, don't forget that. The courtroom had seen many shocking testimony, but what Keanu shared next was different. It wasn't just the revelation, it was the feeling of fear mixed with the pressure of silence in an industry that thrives on it. He admitted that he had the chance to speak up years ago. There were times, after hearing about an artist who had disappeared suddenly or rumors of other victims, that he wanted to speak. But something always held him back. Sometimes it was just a vague warning. Other times, a close friend gently pulled him aside and reminded him, don't be the one to break the unspoken rule. And sometimes, it was just the fear that no one would believe him. So what made him decide to break his silence? The courtroom. Keanu testified that when he saw Cassie Ventura crying on the witness stand, when he heard the details, the timelines, the descriptions that eerily matched his own experiences, something inside him changed. He realized these were no longer isolated stories. They were connected. It was never about me, Keanu said. It was a system, and I was in it, even if I didn't want to. I saw enough that I couldn't pretend I didn't know. He recounted a moment in 2020 when a former colleague texted him after the first allegations surfaced. Now is your time. If you speak, I'm behind you. Keanu confessed that he deleted the message, not out of suspicion, but out of fear. It wasn't until he received a subpoena from the court that it became clear this wasn't punishment. This is my last chance to tell the truth. This is not about revenge, Keanu told the court. This is about getting things straight, about saying what needs to be said before I leave this industry forever. When Keanu Reeves finished speaking, the mood in the courtroom was completely different from the previous days. The quiet confidence of Diddy's defense team seemed to have completely evaporated. The famous Hollywood supporters were no longer present. Instead, there was a stifling, oppressive silence. Diddy's lawyers tried to object to some details of Keanu's testimony, arguing that they were just hearsay, irrelevant. But the judge, clearly affected by the testimony, decisively dismissed all objections. The jury stood still, their eyes fixed on Reeves. One juror even had tears in his eyes. Another scribbled notes in his notebook. This was not just the testimony of a star, but a profound judgment on an entire culture. Keanu's final words echoed through the courtroom as he said, "The only reason I'm still standing here is because I chose to say no, and the only reason I said no is because I believe that line still exists." He looked directly at Diddy, who sat with his head bowed, jaw clenched, lips pursed. "You said that legacy has value," Keanu continued, "but I'd rather be forgotten than be remembered by living in your shadow." The moment, raw but powerful, was like a bolt of lightning that broke the silence. As Keanu left the stand, a brief recess was called. Reporters rushed into the hallway, tapping away at their keyboards, while sketchers hurriedly took notes of the defense team's confused and anxious expressions. For the first time, fear was evident in their every move, because Keanu wasn't just testifying, he was confirming all the suspicions behind the event. The tension in the courtroom grew suffocating as an unexpected figure was called. Stepping up to the witness stand was Jada Pinkett Smith, actress, businesswoman, and Will Smith's famous wife. Her eyes scanned the jury, then she took a deep breath, as if she were about to reveal something she had kept hidden for years. Jada reportedly said that in 2004, she was invited to a private meeting with Diddy. There, a strange document was presented, not a contract, not a partnership agreement, but a document she described as a loyalty covenant. The testimony that followed stunned the courtroom, revealing a part of the story that had until now been buried in the dark. The atmosphere in the courtroom became tense as the bailiff called out an unexpected name, Jada Pinkett Smith. Her presence drew all eyes to the witness stand. Entering the courtroom in a simple black suit, her face impassive, she placed her hands on a Bible and began her surprising testimony. Jada admitted that she understood her appearance in court was unusual, but that she could no longer keep quiet. For years, she had kept a deep secret about a strange loyalty agreement Diddy had offered her to sign, something she now describes as dark and powerful. As she watched the trial in private, she listened to testimony from several women, assistants, and associates about the pressures, confusing documents, and veiled threats. Jada then realized that the document that had been handed to her was not simply a normal agreement, but seemed to belong to a much more complex and frightening system of power. Not looking for protection or support, she came here to speak the truth. She revealed that in 2004, she had a private meeting with Diddy in a luxurious and quiet space, which was initially introduced as a discussion about charity cooperation and community development projects. The atmosphere at the meeting was carefully set. Soft lighting, soft jazz music, and a glass of champagne was offered, which she refused. However, what surprised her was a black document that was handed to her without any clear explanation. At first, she thought it was just a normal contract, but it was actually a loyalty agreement with extremely serious and pressure-filled content. The document, which was about 7 pages long, bore no legal markings or signatures from lawyers, but was menacing in tone and demanded absolute secrecy, not just in everyday life, but beyond. The terms were described as a system of tacit covenants, demanding silence and unlimited compliance, with warnings of dire consequences for violations. Portions of the document were reminiscent of an ancient covenant, with vague references to ritual, circles of power, and punishments for betrayal. The content was not about material gain or creative control, but focused entirely on the control and submission of the soul to a greater purpose. Jada said she refused to sign the document, feeling terrified, as if she were being drawn into a force she did not fully understand. The original document then mysteriously disappeared, but she still remembered every word, even reciting the terms that required absolute secrecy not only in life, but also in the spiritual realm. Some parts emphasized not revealing knowledge in sacred spaces, not allowed to be made public in court, church, or any public place. This idea made her feel uneasy, and like she was bound not only in the present but also beyond death. In her testimony, she also mentioned a secret hierarchy, where levels of information were unlocked only by demonstrating loyalty through tests and gatherings that only those in the inner circle understood. Important phrases were mentioned repeatedly but not specifically defined, creating a veil of mystery that was difficult to explain. Finally, she warned of the consequences of breaking silence, which she described as both a divine punishment and a mortal life, as an inseparable link between loyalty and the system of power she had been a part of. The appearance and testimony of Jada Pinkett Smith completely changed the atmosphere of the trial, creating a new twist and revealing hidden corners that no one had known before. The courtroom fell into a stifling silence as the testimony was revealed, causing confusion on the faces of the jury members and shock in the audience. The witness insisted that she was completely sober and had no intention of exaggerating the story, emphasizing that this was the serious truth, not a joke or a publicity stunt. The person opposite believed the document and expected that she would eventually agree to sign it. However, the refusal created a turning point, followed by a chilling warning delivered clearly and powerfully, a warning that still makes her tremble to this day. You will regret it in the next life. This moment was imprinted in her mind, like a ghost haunting her for many years. After the refusal, the energy in the room changed, carrying a heavy and almost supernatural feeling. The music suddenly stopped. The expression on the person opposite changed, no longer mysterious, but cold and serious. The warning was not simply a physical threat or any other specific form, but rather a curse, a supernatural power that was believed to last forever. The story became more tense as the seriousness of the threat was confirmed. The witness did not hesitate to confirm that the other party did not consider it a joke, and this made her unable to take it lightly. The warning was accompanied by terrifying predictions about the consequences if she resisted or went against the flow of power. Her career would be affected, projects would mysteriously collapse, important producers would stop communicating, and personal relationships could be broken for the safety of others. Although there was no direct action, the threat created a deep and indescribable fear. At the end of the meeting, she left the place immediately, without saying goodbye or looking back. The tremor remained with her throughout the ride back to the car, as she realized she had just witnessed a side of him she had never seen before, a part of a force far greater than what appeared on the surface. After that encounter, her silence was not out of complicity, but out of a lingering fear. She carried that fear with her like a ghost for years, at events, parties, and private moments, constantly scrutinizing who else might have gone through the same thing. The distinct change in the people who had worked with him made her notice a disturbing pattern. Many who had once had bright futures disappeared, many became quiet and shunned the limelight, while others remained present but with strange, uneasy eyes. She sensed that she had just escaped a complex system that many people were caught up in, a system that kept them bound but unable to speak. Those terrifying experiences followed her home in the form of recurring nightmares, the feeling of being constantly watched, mysterious phone calls with a silent voice on the other end. She tried to write down what she experienced, but eventually burned her diary for fear of being discovered. For many years, she dared not share this even with those closest to her. The return of the trial and similar testimonies from other witnesses made her realize that she was not alone, not crazy or imagining things. The system had worked for many people, and her standing up to testify was not only facing the past, but also a courageous decision to face the danger that could come again. She once saw silence as a way to protect herself, but now she understood that silence was actually a shield for the forces behind it, protecting them from the light of truth. The prosecution presented 2 additional loyalty agreements recovered from Diddy's former employees and associates, which drew a lot of attention in the courtroom. Though the documents were different in format and language, They contained elements that were strikingly consistent with Jada's testimony. One came from a former assistant who said he had received the documents in 2007, while the other came from a former dancer on the 2010 World Tour. Both documents featured posthumous non-disclosure clauses, perpetual contracts, and an emphasis on the need for a legacy to be maintained through sacrifice. The jury members were left puzzled as they pored over the evidence, because the parallels to Jada's story were too obvious to deny. But it didn't stop there. A forensic handwriting expert was called in to analyze the markings on the three documents, from handwritten notes, underlining, to a mysterious symbol depicting an eye inside a circle. The results showed that all matched Diddy's handwriting. When asked about the symbol, the witness confirmed that it was considered a tracking mark, both protecting and punishing those who betrayed the mission. The prosecution immediately faced strong objections from Diddy's legal team, who called the documents forgeries and accused the prosecution of conspiracy. However, the judge rejected this argument, emphasizing that the consistency between the three independent sources of evidence and the forensic analysis was a solid basis for further consideration. This event made the atmosphere in the courtroom stifling, and many observers were shocked to the point that one person had to leave the room after fainting during the third contract. The case grew far beyond the realm of celebrity scandal, emerging as a spiritual cult disguised as a loyalty pact. The calm, haunting testimony of the man made it clear that this was more than just paperwork or contracts. Behind it all was a system built on fear, silence, and absolute control. The stories that emerged revealed that this was not an isolated incident, but a vast network that many in Hollywood had been talking about quietly, but few had dared to speak out. The witness revealed that for years she had carefully avoided certain gatherings, turning down lavish invitations because she knew what they were really about. An intricate system of codes and secret languages, from the upstairs room, the midnight circle, to bring your aura, were all unspoken signals indicating who was being invited into the network of power. The witness claims she was not the only one approached, but one of the few who had the courage to say no and survive. For a long time, she quietly warned others, although she could not share the whole story because of the danger. Many withdrew from the spotlight immediately after being approached, while others admitted in secret about similar encounters, where they were coerced or tempted with opportunity in exchange for loyalty and silence. Everything was always packaged as an opportunity, never posed as a threat, but the threat was present in every word, every look and gesture. Those who disappeared from support or lost track were not resting, but could be the result of being deeply hurt by that underground system. The witness's tone remained steady but grew heavier as she insisted that if this trial had not taken place, she would never have dared to speak. But now the silence must end. The truth is, the worst thing is not to reject power, but to remain silent, allowing that power to continue to grow and operate in the shadows. As Jada took the stand, the eyes of everyone in the courtroom were constantly on Diddy, and the expression on his face clearly reflected the hidden emotions inside. Initially, Diddy appeared quite calm, leaning back in his chair and bowing his head as if trying to suppress his emotions. However, as the documents were read, along with Jada describing the details of the 2004 encounter, his demeanor began to change significantly. The relaxed posture gradually disappeared, replaced by a look of leaning forward, constantly rubbing his temples as if to relieve the pressure. Although the defense attorney quietly whispered beside him, Diddy still nodded vigorously and used his hands to signal for them to stop. What caught the most attention was Jada's reaction when she used her own words against him, especially when she repeated the phrase, "You will regret it in your next life." Diddy's shock was palpable, and when the watcher was mentioned, he immediately turned away, avoiding eye contact not only with Jada but also with the entire jury. It was also a rare moment in the trial when Diddy showed surprise, almost unprepared. Images of this moment were quickly captured by sketch artists in the courtroom and soon went viral on social media. One reporter described Diddy's face as haunted, creating a heavy and tense atmosphere in the courtroom. Whispers spread throughout the audience and press area to the point that the judge had to ask for silence twice to maintain order. In the midst of the tension, Diddy took out a notebook and began writing furiously. In response to this incident, Diddy's legal team held an emergency meeting with the judge, requesting that Jada's testimony be removed from the trial record. However, this request was flatly rejected. The judge made it clear that the witness had appeared voluntarily and that what she had to say was closely related to the broader allegations in the case. The tension in the courtroom grew as the similarities between the loyalty agreements were laid out, leaving Diddy unable to hide his obvious reactions. A witness to the trial captured the moment his hands shook and his face was flustered, unable to hide his loss of control. Throughout the testimony, Jada kept her distance, never looking directly at him, until the very end when she insisted that it was Diddy who should face trial, not her. The courtroom exploded with excitement. The heavy atmosphere transformed into a fierce energy. For the first time, the silence was no longer a protective shield, but a voice demanding clear explanation, every word. Even as Jada left the witness stand, tension still hung over the courtroom, while outside her testimony created a ripple effect that spread throughout the entertainment industry. Headlines and social media burned like wildfire, portraying her as breaking her silence and exposing a dark power complex tied to Diddy. Phrases like, "You'll regret it in your next life," became a recurring theme, while social media was abuzz with a myriad of reactions, from vaguely supportive to outright unease. Podcasts and articles analyzed every detail, piecing together the puzzle of missing artists, ruined careers, and long-ignored rumors. The testimony ignited a new movement, prompting the district attorney's office to confirm that more subpoenas would soon be issued. Allegations of loyalty contracts, front companies, and networks of lawyers enforcing silence began to be investigated more closely. A national television legal expert said that if the documents and testimony are confirmed, the case could become the biggest scandal in entertainment history, surpassing even the most shocking scandals. Jada's courage not only exposed an individual, but also revealed a complex and terrifying system. The spiritual aspect attributed to Diddy, along with the belief in timeless contracts, and the symbol of the Watcher as a form of spiritual control, created a special layer of fear. Diddy not only used his power to impose silence, but also sought to possess and control those in that network. The judge immediately ordered a thorough review of these complaints and also noted that Jada's reputation and career guaranteed the veracity of her testimony, even though she had no benefit from speaking out and faced many risks. As the trial ended, the air in the courtroom carried an eerie calm, like the aftermath of a violent storm. But outside, a bigger storm was brewing as the world began to take notice and demand answers. In the days following her testimony, Jada reportedly received anonymous text messages and silent calls from other celebrities, those who had been affected but had not dared to speak up. They thanked her for breaking the wall of silence they had been unable to break. Some who had been hesitant to do so now reached out to the district attorney's office, setting off a chain reaction that was impossible to stop. What's less well known is that Jada had been trying to warn others for years. In a private meeting in 2016 with a group of powerful women in the music industry, she advised them to stay away from any approach involving Diddy, especially one that seemed spiritual or demanded total loyalty. She emphasized that this was not just a man, but an unpredictable dark force. Although no one spoke at the time, their eyes revealed deep understanding and discomfort. Back in court, this detail was revealed when a journalist approached Jada's close friend during a sideline interview, revealing some of the complex picture behind the case. Jada did not want to turn things into a war, but only wanted to protect the people around her without hurting them. However, the fear that if the silence continued to exist, this dark force would expand even more haunted her. The consequences of her testimony continued to spread every day, with several production companies being investigated for forced contracts, a music streaming service quietly removing related playlists, and a fashion brand canceling an advertising campaign featuring Diddy's image and legacy. Jada, meanwhile, has remained silent in the media, presumably to let her words resonate honestly, without being distorted or exploited. She has said what she needed to say, and now it is time for everyone to reflect. But even in silence, her decision to speak out is the first breakthrough, marking the collapse of a decades-long wall of fear. And now, others are slowly coming forward. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you find the content useful and interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share